I'm Brett Stuart with Technical Intuition, and in this video I'll be discussing the topic of Antarctica and going over a few newsworthy events as well as a remote viewing project that I participated in that looked at the most significant relics on the frozen continent. And so with that, let's jump into it. Antarctica is often called the international continent. It's a place touted for its worldwide cooperation, peace, and scientific discovery. And there are currently 70 known research stations that are scattered across the landscape, hosted by 29 different countries. The history behind the establishment of these stations hasn't been an easy one. Not only is it difficult to travel to Antarctica, but there's an immense amount of work that goes into building and maintaining these stations, some of which hold up to 1,200 people at peak summer hours. Now, in 1946, what's known as Operation High Jump was launched by the United States and was led by Admiral Richard Byrd. He went down to Antarctica with 13 ships, 23 aircraft, and 4,700 men. And it's quite a contingent, and it was the largest naval expedition ever to reach Antarctica. Even the period of expeditions during what's known as the International Geophysical Year, following in the 1950s, was nowhere near that size. Operation High Jump was also comprised of newly released soldiers and sailors from World War II, and there are very few of these 4,700 men who had any polar experience whatsoever. The official story was that the operation's purpose was for aerial reconnaissance and photo mapping, but many of the pilots later confirmed that they really didn't know what they were looking for, and that they didn't know anything about precision flying, which would have been required for the officially stated goals. Steve Quayle, author of Empire Beneath the Ice, contends that Admiral Byrd was actually sent to Antarctica to seek out and destroy Nazi bases that the US intelligence agencies had discovered following the Second World War. Moving ahead to the modern day, Antarctica has been in the news quite a bit lately, due to many of the world's political and religious leaders making trips to the bottom of the world. For example, on November 3rd, 2016, then US Secretary of State John Kerry visited Antarctica when he landed for a 2-day trip on Election Day, and his publicly stated reason being to hear from scientists about the impact of climate change on the frozen continent. Now, obviously, this could have been done over a phone or a Skype call, so this was a rather expensive tourist trip on taxpayer dime. Companies charge close to $60,000 per person for an overnight trip to the continent, and Kerry took between 9 to 10 staff members, which suggests that he billed taxpayers almost $500,000 for the excursion. Curiously though, Kerry received only a single briefing in the 2-day period, but he took multiple helicopter tours around the surrounding McMurdo Dry valleys. This is a baffling fact, especially considering the price involved, and that one would think that he would spend extensive time with the scientists instead of flying out to various locations by helicopter. This caused widespread speculation that Kerry's true intent for visiting the continent was being kept under wraps. Other strange news regarding the continent stems from the discovery of a massive gravitational anomaly hidden beneath the ice of Antarctica. 151 miles across, with a minimum depth of about 2,700 feet, this huge object stretches across the frozen wasteland in an area called Wilkes Land. Uncovered in 2006, NASA satellites spotted the object while measuring gravitational anomalies in the middle of a 300-mile-wide crater. Ralph von Friess, a professor of geological sciences at Ohio State University who discovered it, said, "This Wilkes Land impact is so much bigger than the impact that killed the dinosaurs, and probably would have caused catastrophic damage at the time." Now, there are many strange stories associated with Antarctica, from Nazis to UFOs, and the locale may as well exist on another planet due to how difficult it is for you or I to reach. Not to mention how easy it would be to keep what's occurring there hidden from the public sight. It certainly stirs the imagination of what might be going on down there, and as remote viewers, we decided to take a look and find out. So starting off, these first few pages is simply the viewer, myself, because this is my remote viewing data, which was done blind, means I didn't know what the target was at the time. It's me simply shaking hands with the site. It's connecting with the information patterns and then downloading them. And so it may look like chicken scratches or scribble because I'm going pretty fast here. It's fairly illegible. It eventually gets to a point to where you're able to start downloading high-level ideas in a later stage. The first high-level drawing that came through was this idea of an individual who was hunched over a wheelchair. And the high-level information associated with this was a person who was recovering from something that reminded me of a disease. And they were using a tool to help them balance themselves by keeping themselves upright, very similar to a wheelchair. The emotions present about this is that the person is very happy about it, that something has occurred that is, they're doing better because of the event or the occurrence. They feel cured. A recovering process is now going on. Moving forward, there's a diagrammatical drawing of an object that is on the end of a long rod. Now, the high-level data associated with this diagram was that of a prong. It reminded me of a needle that's associated with surgery. I had this idea, this very high-level idea of like acupuncture. It wasn't actually acupuncture, it's just that was my imagination trying to come to grips with the data that was coming through, but that it was some type of surgery, some type of corrective surgery that was poking and kind of prodding in a sharp manner to correct something else. It was correcting something that was, say, either broken or something that if an individual was sick, it was being utilized in a way to correct that. Now, the way that it's doing this, according to the data, is it's emanating and emitting a hum or a pulse, and the actual object is being laid on top of the individual in a non-intrusive manner, and the process is repeated. The final piece of data that came in here at the end is pretty interesting. It reminds me of an idea, whenever it's in two little ticks, we refer to that as analogy, or an AOLS for remote viewers out there. And so that it's not exactly this, but it reminds me of this. And it reminds me of something that's taciturn, which simply means something that's being kept secretive, out of the public eye. So this is a type of surgery, a type of corrective process that is not being shared with the general public. Moving on to the third and final drawing of this first session, I drew a diagrammatical representation of the site, essentially what the landscape looked like. Now, it's very basic. It's just a couple buildings. It looks like a road, and it's near the ocean. It looks like some sort of water. Now, the high-level data associated with the diagram is it shows that it's a complex. There's a lot of different buildings here, and it reminded me of a resort, but specifically a 60s styles resort. Architecture itself was rather dated. It was not modern at all, so it was perhaps made in the 50s or 60s. This is a concrete facility, and there's a specific branch that is associated with scientific research on types of tumors, or things that remind me of tumors. So it's body ailments. I described the actual location itself as a place that's distant. There's mountains nearby. I have it at high elevation, and I described, now this is referred to as mental noise because I mentioned that, well, it seems like there's just a lot of forested greenery here, when in fact, the actual target is the complete reverse. There's absolutely no greenery there, so it's actually flipped 180. But even in the best of sessions, you're going to have sometimes mental noise in there. But the idea of it being scenic and also being distant, removed from city life is very accurate. So we look at these all together. It all combines on a final site template, a final page. And when looking at the most significant relics that exist currently in Antarctica, we're shown with the remote viewing work contextual information about research in types of healthcare that is being applied and curing things that is being kept hidden from the public. And it's doing this with some type of tool, this prong, this needle, that is emitting some sort of a hum or a pulse, something that seems kind of foreign. People are here in wheelchairs, and they're being operated on with a type of practice that's being kept secret. Now, for what purpose and what exactly it's curing or solving is not in this work specifically, but shows that in these facilities, they're fairly old facilities built in the 60s or 60s era, that's what's going on here, and that is the relic that remote viewing points to. Now, with remote viewing, we're able to specifically task, at least the project manager typically does this, specifically task different areas on this site template and explore them in more detail. So you can zoom back in and access more information through this process. The first thing that I was tasked to look into additionally, again, before I had any idea that this had anything to do with Antarctica, was the tool itself. And specifically, I looked at the one that was being helped to keep this person balanced and upright. Nothing really strange going on here. It's pretty straightforward. This just shows a heavy, dense support frame that is helping someone stand. It's like an A-frame or a crutch. There's some fabric attached to it. It's a garment. There's some velvet fabric attached to it. And it seems to be or coincide with someone wearing a gown or a flowing dress. So you can mentally imagine someone perhaps in a nightgown that they would get from a hospital, and then they have a crutch. So nothing real strange here. It zoomed in on what is this tool that the person is helping stand, and it's just a crutch. Next, I was tasked with looking a little bit more specifically on the diagrammatic drawing that was produced on this pulsating, humming object that was being used in a surgical manner to cure or heal this person. The drawing itself showed it looked like a clamp was holding something in place, and it was being moved back and forth. Again, it seemed topical in nature. It was non-intrusive. The stick itself was allowing someone to kind of not touch this material directly, but still be able to maneuver it in ways for whatever reason. Now, the high-level data associated with this showed again that there's heat emanating from this, but it's oscillating in a way where it's hot and cold again and again, and that this creates a field that is surrounding the person. Now, the high-level data associated with this drawing shows, again, it repeats the emanating idea, but it shows what's being emanated. It's hot and cold, and it's doing it in an oscillating manner. And this is creating a field which is surrounding the actual material or the object that's being held in place. It shows that there's the container or material that is doing that, that's keeping whatever's causing this emanation, allowing someone to manipulate it. The thing that's emanating this, though, is something that simply reminds me of, it's like a rock, it's like a gem, it's like a magnet. I don't have an exact name for it. Again, I say it's like a crystal. It's very close. It's something that you'd find, it's like a rare earth material, essentially, is the closest vocabulary I have to describe this. But what it's doing is it's creating a field of some type that is soothing something else, which is the person that's being operated on. And it's been put in a plastic container that's a vise that has an exterior around it. It looks like this is being, the actual cover itself is harnessing it in a way, and it's acting like a prism, like it's focusing it, this natural field that's being created by this material, by this rare earth material, to then focus it in on the individual that it's being applied to. More detailed sketch was produced for this. And again, it showed the prongs or the vise holding this material, that it's placed near the person. It's too hot to touch, so you couldn't hold it in your hands, but it's like a rock or a gem, and it's more than heat, but it's also energy, and this is charged in some manner. So it's a rather exotic type of material that is being dealt with here. Next, I was tasked to remote view the facility, to draw it and try and describe exactly what was going on here and pull out more information about it. As you can see from the sketches, it shows that there are 2 domes located here, geodesic domes, and then there are some walkways and or roads that then lead out to something else. There is a pair of these, so it seems there are 2 of these very specifically, and each of these buildings mirrors one another, so they built 2 of the same building, 2 of these domes. And these are described as advanced, old advanced though, like 60s New Age, whereas the architecture of the 1960s would be viewed as the future from when these were built. So fairly old, not recently built, maybe around the 1950s, which lines up very closely with the original researchers that went down there and started building these stations. My work described these as glass domes, that they're ornate, and they provide a scenic type of facility because you could see through the glass into the outer exterior. And these are laboratories for research, but this is being done behind the scenes here. This is not in the public domain. And what we know about Antarctica is that it is very far removed from anything in the public domain, only what way we would be told about or leaked about. High-level drawing was created for this. It was just a little bit more detail, which showed that there were multi-stories inside each one of these glass domes. There are beams. It seems that there are offices in here with people, and there's an open area. So perhaps that there were buildings inside the domes, and then people could then walk around inside of them as well. Next, I was tasked with looking a little bit more closely at the research. And the first diagram that I produced, it showed an individual. I mean, it's a very strange diagram of an individual, but somebody working over someone on a table, on a slab. I described the research as an encompassing activity that is engaging in a dead end It's futile. Whatever that they're trying to do with this here in this research, they're banging their head against the wall with this research. They're repeating, and there's an anomaly that's occurring. They don't necessarily know why, but they can't seem to figure it out, whatever they're trying to figure out. They have devices here that are measuring this force, this emission that's coming off this rare earth material. Two things about this is, one, it's an unknown energy. The researchers don't know how this is being generated or why it's coming off this material here. The name for this, now whether or not it's the actual name that they refer to it there, but it's referred to, at least the data point that came through was a radical wave. I'm not a physicist or a scientist, so I don't know if that makes sense. It was simply the data point that came through. Finally, the other information is that there seems to be some sort of slip-through point that allows this energy to come through. And there's a barrier that then distorts and has the capability of creating a mutation in an organic life form. So this was pretty interesting because the high-level drawing that was produced for this, to understand a little bit better about the research, is it showed that this research is causing someone, it affects someone's vision. So you can think of their mind or their sight. And so it's just a simple stick figure walking zombified like a drone. There's a distortion that's being placed on them. And that ultimately what's going down here is that there's a ward of human experiments in these secret taciturn facilities. That a rare earth material is being studied for its unique properties, and that the way it looks, it's very crystalline in nature, and that the scientists are trying to harness the qualities to capture its potential. And the closest analogy of what it looks like to me is lunar mining. And if you think about, well, the moon is dust and white and fairly barren, it's a pretty close analogy as far as what it's like to be in Antarctica, I suppose. You may as well be on the moon because it's so far removed. And so what they're doing is they're mining this material and they're experimenting with it, but they're experimenting on humans. So in summary, what the remote viewing data described as far as the most significant relics that exist in Antarctica at the moment is it's dealing with rare earth material. Now, when thinking about the actual research that's been done about the anomaly, the gravitational anomaly that's occurring down there, that was discovered by NASA scientists, I believe what makes the most sense as far as a postulate is concerned is that that material, or something like it, is being mined down there and then experimented on as far as the effects it has on the human psyche and the human physiology. That something is happening, that research is being done, that when placed in close proximity to a human being, it changes or affects their vision. And it was a very specific data point, and this is corroborated by other remote viewing work on this as well, that it affects the mind of the person somehow that's being experimented on. In what manner? Well, the closest analogy is zombification. So whether that makes them more susceptible to being influenced by an outside source or something else that we don't quite understand, something is going on in that department. And this is certainly not something you're going to hear about on local news. Why would the government or the researchers down there ever share this with the public? Because they would instantly be condemned by the national audience. One thing to remember though, it seems that the research, at least at present time, has reached a dead end. They're unsure how to move forward any further than they've currently already gone. So what that means and whether or not this will one day come into the public light, I obviously don't know. You can look with remote viewing, but that's another project. But I do think it was interesting to find that in these old facilities that were built in the 1950s and the 1960s, in these geodesic glass domes, supposedly only one of them was built, but according to this work, many more were built. They're simply not public. That research is going on down there on materials that don't exist anywhere else. And it would stand to reason that the material they're working on comes from this impact crater, from this gravitational anomaly, that is emanating something that the researchers don't know how, that it's a radical wave that affects the human mind. It'd be a very powerful thing if it could work in that manner. And who knows what they've been experimenting on with it. So that'll conclude remote viewing Antarctica relics and what we discovered going on down there. There's obviously much more that we could look at. Maybe at a future point we'll look at the artifacts that we remote viewed down there, as well as some of the other data. I think even some of the more recent going-ons are worthy of remote viewing projects, which I may look at in the future. But if you like this video and content on the channel, please hit a subscribe, like the video. You can always support me on Patreon. It helps a lot. And I really do want to thank everyone who's already supported me through that venue. Thank you so much. I'll see you in the next video.